please give me a warm welcome for Rick Tech board member and entrepreneur Richard Ford.
I appreciate that, and I guess I should start since you had I don't have my shirt on right now. I'm wearing my Tanjo shirt, but I guess I'm more of a DC Comics guy. Let's not start a fight or a rumble out here. But and my favorite sort of superhero would be Batman. Anybody know what Batman's superpower is?
Innovation.
He doesn't have one, right? He's a millionaire. That's a superpower unto itself. But he is able to wield technology to achieve his goals and to thwart crime and fight evil and all that. So I kind of like that. But yeah, thanks to all of you for coming to Tech Talk Thursdays on a Wednesday. That demonstrates enormous agility, and I really appreciate that. And we are going to, actually, I'm going to do this first. We're going to talk about, I'd love to talk to you about machine learning and AI and stuff like that. And this is from a talk that I just did recently. And I want to set the bar a little bit lower in terms of expectations, so therefore I can exceed it. I don't know how many of you had expectations before you came in. Did any of you? Well, good. Then I guarantee satisfaction, right? Because the algorithm is anytime you can exceed expectations, that's satisfaction. So, well, years ago I did a conference where I had my friend Stubby Doo, who's the producer for Dr. Dre, come and talk at one of these sorts of conferences, talking about how we can use technology to do music. But one of the examples that he showed me was this next one, and this is machine learning trying to compose music. And I want to use this just to sort of set your expectations. For my country music fans.
Daddy was strong and the stars of heaven.
You know the words, right? Sing along.
Great big bag, it was money, the devil, the crazy strings, and the shot of her lady. And she said, no, you can't take my door. I don't want to love you anymore.
Everybody.
Break my heart, beat my face, walk the risk of good in a whiskey straight. No, you can't take my door.
This is going to stick in your head and you're going to be singing this all night long. But it goes on and on. I'm going to stop there just to say, you know, AI technology, machine learning really is advancing really quickly, but we have not yet reached that point where we don't need human beings. So despite all the stuff you're hearing in the press about it and how the singularity might be near, I want to talk about the fact that, you know, using machine, this is what happens when machine learning is left unsupervised, by the way. It doesn't do very well. But if you supervise it and you constrain it and you give it tasks that it can perform easily, and with a little bit of human cooperation, the humans and the machines working together, you can really do really amazing stuff. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. And if anybody wants that, I'll be happy to send you that so you can put it in your playlist.
While we're waiting, we also have with us today the Thai Carolinas president, Simi Prasad. So we want to thank Thai for the
Hi,
partnership.
how are you?
Yeah,
Good
of course.
to see you. Welcome.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you.
Apologies.
No,
Just
no.
running a little bit behind. So.
At the end, we'll let Simi talk a little bit about Thai. Richard's familiar with Thai. They're an innovation entrepreneurial network, and we're working in Morrisville on more partnership opportunities with them. So thank you for coming today.
Sure, thank you.
Absolutely,
for having
thank
me.
you. So I think one of the things Steve asked me to dig into a little bit more, because we're, of course, at Tanjo applying a number of technologies across a lot of different domains, but we're specifically going to look at right here, and I'm very interested in, how can we bring technology to bear to increase civic engagement, build community, and improve governance, right? So that's the topic that we want to sort of dig into. But first, I always like to give a little bit of perspective. This is my perspective, just so you know where I'm coming from and my team. There's some Tanjo folks out here as well. Our background is really in computer gaming. And in this area, in the Triangle, we've made a number of game companies. We've done game companies with Tom Clancy, with Michael Crichton, with Ozzy Osbourne, with Douglas Adams. Only one of those people is still alive. I'll let you figure that out for yourself. Draw your own conclusions. Ozzy, right? And of course, the big hit that we've had is Red Storm Entertainment with author Tom Clancy. We're the ones to blame or thank for having realistic tactical shooter games that you see out there today. But if you think in terms of AI, and gaming, if you want to make very convincing characters, convincing environments, you have to master AI. So that's been part of our DNA for a long time. And so that sort of naturally flowed into where we are today. And then shortly thereafter, I created a company called 3D Solve Taking. This was after September 11th, where I was mad, like all of us were, went down to the Fort Bragg, knocked on the gate and said, you know, I don't know how I can help, but I have all this cool technology. We're the guys who did Rainbow Six and realistic tactical shooters. How can we help you guys? And we ended up building simulations to train around communications gear and all sorts of things at JSOC, and built a whole business around that called 3D Solve. Lockheed Martin ended up buying that company, and my team and I here, we decided not to move the team anywhere, still kept them right here in Cary, North Carolina, but we have a concentrated group of very, very smart people. So two of my guys, so my current CTO, Ken Lane, at Lockheed Martin, this 100-year-old company with 130,000 people in it, got Technologist of the Year in our second year there, just to give you an idea. And then David Smith, who's my co-founder with Tanjo, and with whom I've done a bunch of these little journeys out here in the film industry and elsewhere, he was the fastest person to reach senior fellow in Lockheed's 100-year history. So, and that's all North Carolina grown talent here. So we want to continue to support places like Wake Tech and our great university system to make more people like that. And that's my role, by the way, is I just try to find people smarter than me like them, and I try to huddle them together and get money and feed them with the money and with caffeinated drinks until they produce really awesome things. But today we have Tanjo, and I'll tell you a little story about how that came to be. And another little bit of the story is, you know, we have a lot of the components here for innovation in the triangle. You need talent, you need, you know, you need good leadership, and you need money, right? The one that we're still sort of struggling with a bit is the money part, but we have the talent, we've got the leadership. There are great people here, there's a lot of very, very smart people here, again, produced by our technology, our tech community colleges and our universities. So, but you don't have to go and move the company outside of North Carolina in order to raise money. I think David and I were on our 7th company that we've started here now, and I think we're like 4 for 7 if anybody's keeping our batting average at all. And so that's pretty successful, I think. But we've been able to get people like, do you guys recognize these guys? It's probably written up there, but so Reid Hoffman is a guy who, with Elon Musk, did PayPal and started LinkedIn and that sort of thing. We got him to come to North Carolina and invest in our business here, and now he's worth, I don't know how many billions and that sort of thing. But he's always trying to get us to move out to the West Coast, but he sees that there's a lot of value here as well. Then guys like Joichi Ito, when I met Joey, he was, I think he was, maybe he was a DJ in Tokyo or something. Didn't have a college degree, but now he's the director of the MIT Media Lab. Very smart, but again, two of the smartest people I know. Like I said, I collect smart people, and when they invest in businesses that I run, of course, I'm very appreciative of that. But that is something that we can do here in the Triangle. And then this is the thesis, again, for today that I started with by talking about that music and how you leave the machines on their own and you're going to get some so-so results. But if you create this sort of fluency, this connection between humans and machines to optimize outcomes, that is a central problem of the century. It's a central problem of the Triangle, of North Carolina, of individuals, countries, or companies, or education institutions. No matter who you are, it's getting that balance right. And the problem is, the answer to that question, to that algorithm, changes about every month, right? Like we used to think, like, oh, there's certain things machines are never going to be able to do. Humans are really good at creativity and that sort of thing, and machines will never reach us in that regard. But they are, you know, we're getting humbled very quickly as developments accelerate in that field. So we'll talk about that. But I still think, and again, I've written in TechCrunch, and I talk about superhuman education, superhuman healthcare, all these areas of endeavor. Was talking with some Allison over here about real estate. I think every field has that. I don't think there's any field really that's immune to that idea of that balance. So that's what we want to talk about for government. We've gotten a bunch of awards recently and a lot of recognition. So I'm going to tell you a quick little story just to set the stage, because I understood from Steve that there's some people that are still fairly new here in terms of understanding what machine learning is. Why is it different? What's different about it? So I mentioned that David and I were at Lockheed Martin with my little team of really smart, tattooed and pierced people that came from computer gaming. And we were called out to Microsoft. This is in 2009. So I don't know if you guys recognize this device. Anybody recognize that? It's the Microsoft Kinect, right, which goes with the Xbox. And they were working on it. That's me with Alex Kipman and with Jaron Lanier. Alex was the inventor of this system. Jaron was there working. Jaron's the guy who came up with the term virtual reality, by the way. So I've been sharing stages with him going back to the early 90s when we watched VR take off and then dive, then take off again and dive. And now it's back up again, so we'll see what happens with VR. But we were there to see if Lockheed Martin could help them with the sensors they were putting in this device. And pretty quickly we found out that what they had was pretty good and they didn't need our help. But they showed us what they were doing, and the problem that they had is they'd shipped Xboxes all over the world. They had, all these Xboxes had only about 100 megabytes of available memory, and they had to build a system that could use those sensors and understand things like, hey, a human just walked into the room, or that's a cat, or that's a dog, or the difference between a table and a chair and a plant and a lampshade, and stuff that sounds really easy to us, but especially even in 2009, which I don't know about you guys, doesn't feel that long ago to me, but it's been 10 years. But back then, that was a computationally really difficult problem to solve with machine vision. And the way they were solving it is not the old way of AI, like we were using to make games, but the new way, which is large data sets are more powerful or better than algorithms. So the old way, just to help keep this straight in your head, the old AI from 1958 until now was a human had to understand a problem completely. Let's say a problem like autonomous vehicles. How do I teach a computer to drive a car, right? That was a difficult problem. And we failed miserably from 2004 to about 2007 because we were trying to do it the old AI way, right? Which is, I need to understand, like, how do I drive a car? And of course, a human driving a car is mostly about ignoring everything you see. If you're looking at every bird that flies by and every person that walks or every car that drives up to stop at a stop sign, you'd be hitting the brake the way new drivers do, right? The way we drive is by ignoring most of the input and processing a lot of stuff, which we don't even understand how we do it. So how can we tell a computer how to do it? So the breakthrough and the reason we have autonomous vehicles today, and the breakthrough for these guys was large sets of examples, and not 100,000 examples, not 1 million examples, but millions and as many as you can get, and then give that to a set of organizing, inferring little machine learning libraries, and it can figure that out, right? And infer and create its own understanding. And today you can just take 100 hours of video, give it to a base level, a basic set of machine learning libraries for automobiles focused on that task, and it can learn to drive just by watching 100 hours of video. Now, in their case, they had examples of stuff from living rooms all over the world, but again, they got it down to this brain that was less than 100 megabytes, not gigabytes, 100 megabytes that fit into Microsoft Kinect system and shipped it all over the world. That blew us away. And again, you think, after being in this business for 30 years, we get jaded, right? And we think, there's nothing that's going to surprise me anymore. And in the end, it's all code. And you're going to hear me say that probably a lot today, because it's true, it's all code. But this is a fundamentally different way of looking at problems, right? And it's getting really interesting. So let's talk about that. We worked on a bunch of different projects, including doing stuff for the Learning Registry. I'm not going to go deep on that. If we get into questions and you want to talk about it, we will. But we built a system. One of the first things I did is built a system that could look at like everything in the Smithsonian, categorize all that stuff, and auto-tag it. So humans were trying to auto-tag that stuff. And Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education at the time, came to Lockheed and said, we need help because humans, this task is going to take a century if humans do it. We've got to have a machine do it. We built a system that could do that. And the way it did it is, let's say I'll just use a quick example that I've used that I hope resonates. If a human being reads a book like War and Peace, right, and you had to tag it, how would you tag it? Who's read War and Peace? You might say, it's a book set in Russia, it's a love story, it's during a war, I don't know,
Tolstoy brothers.
written by Tolstoy, right? And that's how you would tag it. You'd probably stop there, right? But that makes search and retrieval, or how transparent to inquiry is that thing now that's been stored away in this, Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of example. This is the image I like to use is, if you guys saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's this clerk who takes this incredibly potent artifact and puts a little tag on it and writes, Ark thing, and puts it away in this big warehouse. And that's the way most data is in most environments, but especially in government, right? Is that thing is now not transparent to inquiry. It can either save or destroy the planet, and yet nobody's going to be able to find it when they need it, right? So what our system does is it can actually read and understand or look at back then we were doing images as well. I'll talk about why we're focused more on text today. But it would map it with up to 4,000 concepts, all given a numerical weight. So this big, huge, fat thumbprint. It's like, as our CTO, Ken Lane would say, it's like typing 4,000 words into the search bar in, 3 seconds. If you could do that, you'd get some really good results. But most humans aren't that good, or aren't going to spend the time to do that. And so that's the secret behind that. The other thing I want to implant in your brain before we start talking generally about applications is this other idea of what are machines really good at? Well, one of the things, like I said, is they can look at lots and lots of stuff really quickly, way faster than any human can, but especially text, but certainly images as well, right? So one of the early things we did is we had our system, we just took what we call a clean brain. Again, that's that sort of raw set of machine learning libraries, and we said, let's have it read every single legal opinion in United States history since 1797 across all 417 federal jurisdictions. Why? Because we can. Because it's a relatively trivial thing to do that if I can just get all that data in one place. And without the system knowing anything about like the law or what any of the words mean, in fact, it doesn't even understand the words. And we'll have to talk about that philosophically later. But it can categorize and classify every one of these things and actually become a great asset for anybody who wants to understand and get easy access to every single case that's ever come before a federal jurisdiction anywhere in the United States since 1797. And that took 8 days, 7 or 8 days. So that's the kind of thing we can do. Here's the other really interesting idea. Like I said, don't ever leave machine learning unsupervised, right? That's how you get that country song that we heard at the beginning. But sometimes leaving it unsupervised is really useful and provides us with an insight that we wouldn't ordinarily have. We call this actually the new scientific method, right? The old scientific method is a human being or a bunch of smart people like us have to sit around and go like, how are we going to make a 50-year battery? Or how are we going to colonize Mars? And let's design some experiments around that and go run the experiments and see what we can come up with, right? So we started with a goal. One of the cool things with machines, with their powerful capability to read a lot of stuff, never forget anything, look for patterns that may or may not be interesting to humans but are interesting to machines, what you can do is just dump all the data in the top and say, hey, machine learning system, find every hypothesis that might be interesting to me, and then rank them in order. And then I'll go through and I'll say, that was cool or that was weird, I don't want to see any more of that. And just that little activity there really accelerates our understanding of the world, gives us new insights into data that we've never had before. So this is a new, and that's what all this stuff really is. It's a new tool in your toolkit, right? So that's some of the sort of basic ideas. And I won't run you through any of this, but again, some of these ideas like this kind of shook my world back in 2014, again, not that long ago, when DeepMind was able to learn how to play Atari games. And that's me with Nolan Bushnell here, the guy who founded Atari originally and also founded Chuck E. Cheese because he needed a place to put his Pac-Man games and all that. But anyway, DeepMind could learn, and it would be pretty easy just to program it in and teach a system how to do it. But instead, it had to watch humans play and figure it out on its own, and very quickly, in a very short amount of time, it could beat every human being at all the, in fact, it learned to play all the Atari games. And then this happened in 2016, which shook us even more, because even those of us who were tracking this, and by this time, like I said, my team of really smart people with tattoos and piercings, was already deep into this machine learning and AI stuff, but we were still going like, you know, man, it's one thing for a machine to learn to drive a car. It's another for a machine to learn to beat a human being at chess. But, man, the game of Go is extraordinarily complex. There's as many positions there as there are atoms in the universe, just to put it in a weird perspective, right? But it actually happened in about 5 to 7, depending on who you talk to, maybe 10 years faster than any of us thought. So that shook the world right there. It shook everybody to say, like, whoa, we really have to start paying attention to this. And that's when Stephen Hawking and Bill Gates and Elon Musk and everybody started throwing up warning flags, right? Going, hey, we thought this was moving slow, but it's moving like technology usually does. It's moving exponentially in big leaps. So that was interesting. It figured out how to solve Rubik's Cube by itself. And again, the point here is not that a system can learn to solve Rubik's Cube. That's fine. It's an algorithmic sort of thing. But the fact that it just didn't even know what a Rubik's Cube was and looked at it and figured it out is what's fascinating about the kinds of tech that we're making. And that is something we have to keep an eye on because this stuff is powerful. We're very often, we humans are building complex systems where we don't understand how it works. That's happening in the financial industry and energy and a bunch of other areas. So we have no hope of trying to stop it if we don't even understand how it works. And when you go to this level of like working with neural nets and things like this, it's going to a whole new level. Now that I've got you there, where hopefully nobody's freaking out, nobody's running out of the room screaming, but let's step back to like, how can we apply stuff today in like a 6-month period of time that can give you a 10x return on your investment? How many IT investments have you guys, how many people here have had an IT investment that paid off 10x in less than 6 months? I usually don't see a lot of hands with that. But that is possible here, and we'll talk about some of those applications. I want to take you through the, well, I'll plant one more seed here for you. I already talked about this idea that old AI, and this is just me arbitrarily saying, before I went to Microsoft and got religion on machine learning, old AI was this, which is a human understanding something and telling a computer what to do. The next wave is just give me a whole bunch of data, and then I need good data scientists to massage it into a position, and then I can get some extraordinary things. I can't find enough data scientists, and I'm getting calls almost every day out of Silicon Valley trying to hire away our data scientists. That's a problem. And at Wake Tech, we're making data scientists. At all the universities around here, we are, so that's a good thing. It's a great field to go into. And then already, though, I'm looking at this next field, which is, again, bringing the human back into this discussion. What does this mean for human behavior? We've spent the last, 10 to 15 years making billionaires in Silicon Valley, and why? Just by doing it the way we did before with ABC and CBS and NBC, by monetizing human attention, right? And coercing human behavior, right? Through advertising and that sort of thing. That's what Facebook and LinkedIn, and that's what it all comes down to. You can distill it all down to monetizing human behavior. So can we do better things with that, though? With this capability, with this data exhaust. So what I did when I started having these sorts of thoughts, me and my team, we reached out and found people like Dr. Richard Carson out of UCal San Diego, and Dr. Jordan Louvier out of University of Washington, who are the foremost academic authorities on this field of human behavior and choice modeling, right? It's like, how do we understand what people are doing? And one of the first things they have me do is read this book. You guys read this book? Have you heard about this? Yeah, so the central idea here is, if you want to understand people, you don't ask them questions, you don't survey them, and it's because they lie. And they don't always intend to lie. Sometimes somebody put it as, we're very poor witnesses to our own narratives, which I think is a pretty pithy way to say it. That, if I ask you, how many drinks did you have? How many glasses of wine do you have a week? Or how often do you exercise? Or how often do you eat fatty food? Or whatever. We all go like, oh, I just only have, one glass, no more than one glass a night, and whatever. It's like, well, we looked in your purchase history and in your trash can and in your location services, and it looks like this number instead. That's what that whole book is about. And it talks about how, exit polls and surveys did not predict Donald Trump or Brexit. What did? Google search data and Amazon purchase data. That told us who people really are. What do they do with their money? What do they do with their attention? and where do they go during the day? And that yields a very, very deep picture of who we all are. Now, like everything, that's a double-edged sword. And I hope that we're going to be able to talk about that a little bit when we get into Q&A, because, and I just did a talk at the East Coast Game Conference 2 weeks ago where it was called The Black Mirror Implications of Data Exhaust and Human Behavior. Cool little paper, right? But it really just says, and even people who are not on, who say like, well, I'm not on Facebook, or I'm not on LinkedIn. It's like, do you have a cell phone? Are location services on? Oh, and do you know if they're on? Like if you haven't gone in and turned it off for every single app you have, they're probably on. And for pennies, I can buy your data that I can tie to you specifically. I know how long you sleep at night, where you go every single day, what do you do with what are your patterns of life that I can turn into something that I can sell or use. So we're in the David Brin transparent society already. So we've been able to do fun stuff with this, like, and I've talked about this before. One of the first things I did, we looked at people that I had a lot of text on. So we had our system read everything Victor Hugo has ever written, everything written about him, and pretty quickly I was able to make Victor Hugo, or a version of him, right? And then I'm able to go visit him every day. Even today, he's been out, how long, Will? Like 26, 27 months now. And I can see, like, what's he interested in? How's he reacting to current events and that kind of thing? What's he reading? And he reads everything and scores it. And he doesn't just read 5 or 10 things a day like a human might. He reads hundreds of thousands of things and scores them all. And I get this really deep view of what he cares about. I'm looking at the world through his eyes. So we initially called this the empathy engine, right? And we can do that with anybody. We've done it with George Washington, Martin Luther King, all sorts of things. We talked about making a dating product for a while. Again, because of the amazing data that we had. And this was 4 years ago. I never got comfortable with it. We decided not to. But again, back then it was pretty easy to get in, get 3 million profiles of OkCupid, have a system that basically, because people write about themselves and talk a lot, I can make a pretty deep model that is essentially a Myers-Briggs or something of all these people. Now I just got to create an algorithm that says what kind of Myers-Briggs profile tends to match well with what other kind, and what physical attributes tend to work well together, and let's make a dating app out of that. And we talked to eHarmony and all these different groups, and everybody got all excited about it, but me and my investors were just like, that's not me. Let somebody else do that, and that's not something I'm going to do. But could you do it, or are they doing it today? Yeah. So it's interesting to be able to do things like go and see what people are doing from these models. But what if the next step I can do is I can actually go and like, hey, if I'm running a company like at Lockheed where I have 130,000 employees, and I'm thinking about, as the president, a new insurance plan or some new policy we're going to roll out. Or let's say you're a city leader and you're thinking about, should we have those bird scooters in Morrisville or whatever? How are people likely to feel about that? What if you could write that sort of statement, present it to all the populations, the synthetic population that lives here, and see how they're likely to react so you're not surprised. The way the CEO of United was obviously surprised when he said some of his tone-deaf things after some of the issues that United had, right? What if you could practice that first? And what you can see here is in real time, I can write my statement, I can change the words, and hit that button, and every time I could see, every one of them is giving me a real-time view of like, well, from my perspective, I don't like that. And other people, of course, like it. And I skipped over this slide, but we were doing that already. When I was at Lockheed, and this is a known sort of practice in the defense industry, if we're going into Afghanistan, or even if you're doing things like relief efforts in Haiti, you model that population. And you don't say, in Afghanistan there's basically 4 or 5 kinds of people, right? You got your Sunnis, you got your Shias, you got your Coptic Christians, you got your whatever, right? Instead, you end up building this really deep model of maybe millions of agent-based models that represent all these potential perspectives. And then you say, hey, what if I did go and build a school for girls right here? What if I paved this road? What if I did this? Who's going to like it? Who's going to not like it? And at what levels, right? Because that's the way reality works. It's not, we're not all like, you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, or you're a man or you're a woman. There's a lot more variety to the perspectives that we have. So we're doing this already, and Gartner gave us an award this past year for our ability to combine our game experience and the machine learning stuff and the stuff we did at Lockheed into this synthetic population experience where for Procter & Gamble, I can build a synthetic population of the United States who only cares about Procter & Gamble products or only cares about how to buy chicken. And we did the chicken one, by the way. And early on, and because we're a little naive, I was telling them this story about what we did in Afghanistan and elsewhere, and I said, you know, you have like 5 segmentation models for the kinds of people who buy chicken in the United States. That, to me, seems overly simplistic. They're like, yeah, you know, we spent $1.8 million on doing this study to get these 5 personas, or these 5 customer segmentation models. I'm like, why don't you have 126 million, one for every household in the United States? Because we can. And they were like, oh, what would that cost? You know, we spent 1.6 million or whatever it was for these 8 or 10. What would that cost? And I said, well, it shouldn't cost any more. But what we found as we got into that process is that there are not, it turns out, 126 million meaningfully different ways to buy chicken. So, in fact, we ended up drawing the line at 42, just for fun. Because, I mean, there's more than that. But what you have to do is say, you can sort of look at all these patterns of behavior, and we did. I think I had a thing in here about this. We partnered with Nielsen. So we're looking at people that actually have that transaction data, and we can look at all those patterns of behavior of how people buy stuff and where they live and, you know, what kind of education and household income and, you know, by gender and all the rural versus urban and all this kind of stuff. And I can model that really deeply, but there's about 42 meaningfully different. So now the exercise is, if I draw a circle around North Carolina, I can tell you how many of those 42 types exist here, and that informs me about, you know, how much of each product should I put in the Harris Teeter down the road here, based on who's here, without, by the way, violating any privacy or compromising anybody's privacy, because I can build these representative models from data that don't tell me exactly where anybody lives, because I don't need to know where anybody lives, but I would like to know probably that they live in the triangle. In the triangle, there's predominantly these 8 ways of buying chicken, and that tells me what to put in the grocery stores, and that's sufficient, and I can stop there, right? So cool stuff. So what if I could do that when I'm trying to govern, like I was just talking about, trying to govern Morrisville or Charlotte or any city, where I could actually have models of data, or have it by neighborhood, right? The persona for this neighborhood versus that neighborhood, that would tell me that, so I'm not surprised in my little simulated SimCity world that I built, I can see, you know, if I do this scooter program, or if I raise the visitors tax, or whatever it's called, you know, the hospitality tax by 2%, how are people going to feel about that? So I'm not surprised when I do it. Because that's the thing we always try to avoid in warfare, and DARPA talks about this, but I think it's now everywhere. It's like avoiding, you know, surprise is a good thing, but especially in government. Nobody likes surprises anywhere, in business or in government. But if you could at least practice ahead of time, look at like, well, we're likely going to get this kind of response from this group, this kind from another, then that would help me tremendously. So the next phase beyond that, beyond just writing to them, gosh, wouldn't it be cool to do this? What if I could actually talk to them? So what you're looking at here, now this is sort of an abstract example, but I've got two AI systems talking to each other, and then a human being in here. He's represented, I don't know if you can see it, by Ben Goff here. Ben is asking questions to a chatbot. The chatbot has been trained just on understanding how humans talk. So Ben can phrase his question 10 different ways, and the thing will understand him, and then it turns and talks to the expert bot that understands this contract, or whatever the content is, or it could be War and Peace, or whatever, or the law, or whatever it is, and he can answer the question, and then the bot says, all right, thank you, you know, AI contract bot guy, and turn around and answer the human. And this works pretty flawlessly right now, assuming you can train it well on data. You've got enough examples to train it on. So that yields a really interesting set of opportunities, right? But that's, you know, again, a lot of these ideas for us really come from gaming. You know, I don't know how many of you played SimCity, but I know Jeff Braun, and when those guys first did SimCity and The Sims and all that stuff, I used even some of the skills I learned in SimCity for how I run businesses today. I'd rather, you know, work off my revenue than actually raise bonds and work with debt, right? That's still what I prefer to do. And I found that to be a winning strategy in SimCity. But again, this idea of like Sim Morrisville, right? With the representative population, the synthetic population on which you can test your ideas, so you can figure out how do I need to communicate with people to get them on the page with, where we need to be and this future vision that we have. And how do I collect information from them about what they want and what are their values, and make sure that what I'm doing is governing in sync with those values. There's all kinds of cool stuff we can do with that. Every time I hear, about the legislature here, somebody, working overnight and coming up with a new fat bill, and they haven't shared it with the other party, and then they put it on the floor and they want to vote by noon, and everybody's like, oh, crying foul, saying, how are we going to read all this in time to do this vote? I'm like, machine learning, we can help you. We call both parties to say, we can help you with that. So I haven't gotten anybody to take us up on it, but I'm like, if you have a system that's been trained on ideally I would say, in an ideal world, it's trained on your constituency, and what are their values, what are their interests, what do they care about, and then have that AI read the bill, right? And then tell you right away, here are the pieces that are objectionable and here are the ones we're fine with. And then you don't have to even read it. You can have the AI read it. And you can train it to read it from whatever perspective you want. But like I said, ideally it's from the constituency that you're representing. And we could speed all this process up. And you could also go to new levels of transparency in government, which I don't know if anybody's up for that yet. Doesn't seem like we are. But the technology is there to help us. So there's tremendous opportunity there. So again, we have some examples here we're playing with around, and we're working on the UK census and some other things, so both here and abroad. And by the way, with our customers in the UK, what's interesting there is they already have the GDPR. You guys familiar with GDPR? I forget already what it stands for, but it's about privacy and protecting privacy. And we have our own version of that. I think it's CCPA or whatever the acronym is. It's coming here as well. So companies are going to really have to, and governments too, are going to have to get really smart about that to make sure that you're not violating personal privacy. But our abstraction layer of the bots, taking the data, wrangling that into representative synthetic populations on which that you can actually talk to and interact with, that is already protective of privacy and checks those boxes. And we're doing it already, like I said, in the UK for banks and other folks, and we can do it here also. So really cool stuff.
I just went to a presentation on that, and that's just in Europe. It's not in North America yet.
But it's coming here too. Yeah, it's like I said, I've already seen what it's called, right? CCPA. I forget what it stands for, but
it is the baseline for the world.
Yeah, something Privacy Act. But and the book that I read a long time ago, I talked about this at the Charlotte event, Steve, was Doc Searle's book, The Intention Economy, which itself was an extension of the Clue Train Manifesto, which came out in 1993. So the minute the internet was born, Doc Searles, David Weinberger, a bunch of guys got together and wrote this manifesto and said, finally, we're going to empower individuals. And the market conversation between people and corporations is now going to be weighted towards people. We won't need advertising anymore, all these wonderful, beautiful things, but of course it didn't happen. But I still think those ideas are really interesting, and there's some interesting business models and opportunities around that, especially in government, to make sure that you do have again, if you've ever played SimCity or The Sims, you want a happy population of people who are thriving, right? Isn't that our goal? That's the utility function or the goal that systems like this can work towards. So let me see. I think those are the main ideas. I'll share this one last idea, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. All right, and then we'll talk about some specific structures around what you can do in towns and cities and local governance. So everybody's heard of Cambridge Analytica, right? So that's an example of using this kind of tech for arguably nefarious purposes, right? For something other than creating a more wholesome democracy. Can we all agree on that? But it's also, like any technology, it's a double-edged sword. This can also be used for really positive things. So this is my example of that. Who eats kale today? How many of you eat kale? Everybody today, right? How many of us were eating kale 6, 7 years ago? Not many people in the U.S. So what happened? Weird, right? I'll tell you what happened. What happened is 7 years ago, the #1 buyer of kale in the United States was Pizza Hut. And it wasn't for eating. It was for putting on the salad bar in the ice because it stays green and it's a nice little decoration. Nobody was eating it. But the American kale growers hired this firm who was talking about tech like what we're describing here, and who this group, I forgot the name of it here, but they understood that, hey, we have a lot of data exhaust on people, and I can understand, like, who are the influencers? Who are people going, where are people going to? What do people think? And there's this, that's how we got driven, by the way, to Dr. Carson and Dr. Louvier. Dr. Carson has this idea of base and swing. And just to map it easily to something everybody understands, when you're looking at Republicans or Democrats, there's no point in trying to make a Trump voter a Democrat, or vice versa, or a Bernie voter a Trump supporter, right? The base and swing. Leave the base alone, but look at the middle swing. That's the largest population. All kinds of interesting things can happen there. To make it easier, like, you don't go to Calabasas, California and try to sell steaks, because they're all juicing. I don't even know what they eat. They're all vegan and they juice, and nobody eats meat at all. So there's no point in trying to sell them a steak, right? So you identify the population that's susceptible to your message, and then you figure out who their influencers are, and you start an information campaign, and you start little, right? So you don't start with like someone who says, iceberg lettuce is fine and I don't need anything else. I eat spinach sometimes. To like, no, microgreens are really good for you. Microgreens. Oh, kale is a really good microgreen. Oh, look, Gwyneth Paltrow loves kale. And here's some recipes that these different celebrity chefs are using to make kale really good. And now it's being served in these restaurants. It's really hip. It's really cool. Next thing you know, we're all going in and demanding, kale that's been massaged properly with a carbon neutral footprint for $15 a plate. That happened in 7 years. So it works. It happens. So again, it's not only understanding people better so you have better empathy, so you can communicate with them better, but also, how do I move them towards the place where I need them to be? If someone's in an unreasonable position, how do I move most of the people I need to agreeing with the new Wake Tech, the new bond that we need to build this building, and why it's a good thing? When they might, I don't want any more taxes, right? It's like, well, but if you do spend a little bit more, we add a couple of cents to your taxes, we can have great facilities like this where we can all gather, and your kids can learn better, and it's at a fraction of the price of other schools, and all these great things. And but I need to be able to get these micro messages across. So that's the other thing you can do. You can simulate that world and test it on your synthetic population, and then do it in the real world, and it works, right? And you got all kinds of interesting ways to do that. Anyway, I'll just leave that reading list up there while we talk about a few things, and I'll just say, so there's 3 basic things I believe represent the low-hanging fruit in town, city, county, state governance, and beyond. The #1 problem, of course, is organizational knowledge. We're in an information age. Everybody's got lots of data, and you've got these big organizations. Think back to the Raiders of the Lost Ark image, right? Where is my useful information? Where's the stuff I need right now to go answer that question? Instead of a human being having to go through and search it all, you just have a machine system that's constantly mapping it with that 4,000 node footprint and can bring it to you immediately. That's the kind of thing that we're doing for organizations like RTI. You may have heard we're doing it for all 58 community colleges. How many of you have heard of that? So we're building one brain that ties all 58 community colleges together and all the knowledge among them. All right, I guess, and that's lunch. No, I guess they have an it's automated. That's kind of cool. So anyway, hopefully you got that list. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, send me the list, because I was writing down the names.
Yeah, automated systems, and it's early. Interesting.
That's weird.
Yeah, coming up on 5. 5 o'clock, the system shuts down, and it's on siesta, I guess. So that's the first one, is harmonizing information. Or think about any time, a big company acquires a small one. You've got that big business challenge of how do I integrate their organizational knowledge and their work processes and workflows with ours. And think about when Lockheed bought my company, and I show up, tattoos, you know, not me, but my guys. No, some of them had no shoes on, tattoo, but really, really smart. But then we're going in there with the honest to God rocket scientists with the pocket protectors, the whole thing. How do you that impedance mismatch? How do you overcome that? But also, like, here's a great set of knowledge. There's knowledge here. How do we cross-pollinate it and get it to something better? You know what Alan Kay calls, or he says, perspective is worth 80 IQ points. So that's number one. Number two is just what I talked about with all this sort of contract bot and that sort of thing. It's just the basic automation. I think that is commoditizing really fast. So the best example is I've seen so far is JP Morgan. We've done this for a number of clients, and it's pretty straightforward to do. Take any task where it's a human being reading a lot of stuff and having to apply some kind of judgment to it, right? Humans are just too dang slow, right? By my reckoning, we haven't had an upgrade since, what is it, Will, the Pleistocene? Something like that. You check my math. So we haven't had an upgrade in a long time. Machines, though, are really advancing quickly. So at JP Morgan, for example, we did a sort of workshop with them, and they found this one area. They said, you know what? Because I did this almost the same talk that I just did to you, and they went, you know, we spend about 340,000 hours a year reviewing loan agreements. That seems like something we could automate with the kind of system you're talking about. We're like, yeah, let us do that for you. Of course, they didn't hire us to do it because we're JP Morgan and we have lots of money and resources. And so they did it themselves at a far greater cost than it would have been to do it with us. But 340,000 hours a year, think about that times, I don't know what New York lawyers cost, $800 an hour? Anybody do the math? Let's just round it and call it $300 million a year of an expense that's just in their budget. Like, this is an understood thing. Every year we're going to have to spend $300 million with New York lawyers to do this function, right? It's built into our stock price. And then all of a sudden they do a project that lasts 6 months and they'll never have that expense again. So an investment of, with us it would have been about 200 grand. With them, the internal group has probably cost them $2-3 million. But now they've saved, and they didn't get it to zero, but they got it to, let's say that now they're spending $30 million a year. So that's a $240 million return on a $2 million investment. You know, I don't know if you guys all went to business school or you're math majors or what, but I don't think you have to be to understand, wow. But not only that, it's an annuity. So that one-time investment now pays you $240 million forever. You're never going to have that cost again. So think about that in the organizations where you guys work, whether it's a city or it's a business or whatever. And it's like, are there things that I can be, thinking back to the original statement about that balance, things that I can be turning over to machines right now and let them do that going forward, and I'll never have that cost again. Does it have implications for employment? Absolutely. But, you know, we'll talk about that, but I mean, that genie's out of the bottle. And if you're a competitor of JP Morgan's and you're still doing it the old way, you're going to be dead soon. Right? And JP Morgan right now, and I bought JP Morgan stock after that, and it's not insider trading or anything because they announced what they were doing. It's public knowledge. But I know that they're going across, they're doing this rapidly, like everything they can find that they can automate, they're automating. And their value of their stock has been going up because they're becoming really profitable. So implications for jobs, right? Well, in 1800, I think 90% of everybody in the United States was involved in agriculture. In 1900, it was 41%. Today, it's 2%. Right? So we've been through this before. It's just back then we had 200 years to deal with it. Now this is all happening in the matter of decades. Today there are more app developers than there are farmers in the U.S. And app developer as a job did not exist before the iPhone came out 10 or so, 12 years ago. So that's the world we're in. So then the last one, so remember there's 2 that I've said. The third one is this idea of synthetic populations, model people's behavior, and then use that to build greater empathy, better ways to communicate and understand the constituents you represent, whether it's your company, your customers, or the people that you're governing. Those are the 3 main ideas. All right, so let's have some questions.